Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Hey, Dom. How are you? Welcome. Welcome to everyone to this session. Welcome to members of the board, our external guests, our employees. We're now towards the end of Amplify for Sydney, and wow, it's been an amazing journey. I'd like to just call out the great music we're hearing from Rich, who has now just left his post. He's over there. Hi, Rich. Rich, thank you. I don't know if you're aware, but Rich is sampling some of the sounds that you're hearing, some of the words you're hearing from our speakers, and mixing them into a dynamic track, which my colleague Jess says we'll put on Spotify at some point. So good on you, Rich. It's really great. Terrific. So today we are here to talk about the skills for the future. You're aware of the hashtag, which is Amplify2017, so I encourage you to get involved and tweet. Now, of course, we heard yesterday on a panel upstairs from Rachel Botsman about the fact that in the UK, in the next 10 years, something like 40% of the jobs will be impacted by disruption simply because they are connected with the transportation sector. So 40% of male jobs in the UK in the next 10 years will be disrupted because of automation and disruption. We heard last night from Norman Lewis, who talked about the fact that we must not just rely on technology to solve our challenges, we must look for our own human potential and recognise our own talents and harness our own talents to be more productive, more innovative and more competitive in the future. This morning, of course, we heard from Sue Suckling. She encouraged us to rethink the paradigm of education and lifelong learning. And if you were here earlier, Chris Shipley and Heather McGowan talked to us about the future of work and the paradigm shift that's about to occur and how we must equip ourselves for the future. So this session then is to carry on that theme and to discuss, well, what are the skills for the future? How will we compete in the future? The robots are rising up, or are they? Do we need to be worried about them, concerned about them, or not? And to help us to facilitate this conversation, Emma Grogan is here from our innovation partner for PwC. Emma is a partner for PwC in their people and organisation practice. I'd like to welcome Emma to the stage now to introduce our panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ruben. So as Ruben said, I'm a partner with our people and organisation practice at PwC, so I'm particularly interested in this discussion this afternoon. I work a lot with clients on performance and reward solutions and how we help organisations evolve those solutions to better support incenting and rewarding and encouraging the development of some of these future skills. If we consider the impact of technology breakthroughs alone on future skills, our own PwC research done in conjunction with the Oxford University predicts that over the next 20 years, 5.1 million Australian jobs, that's almost half of all of the current jobs in Australia, are at major risk from digital disruption. And when we say at risk of digital disruption, we mean that there's a greater than 70% chance that that job could be automated by technology. At the top of the list, in terms of the jobs most likely to be automated, happen to be accountants. So as you can imagine, that's a pretty concerning stat for a professional services firm. So very keen to hear what some of the panellists have to tell us this morning about what the new future skills are that we need to focus more on, and also how we can better develop those within our organisation. So we might flick over to do a quick introduction. We might start with Sue. So maybe just tell us a little bit, just a quick one-liner about what you do, and then maybe something interesting about yourselves.
So, Sue Suckling from New Zealand, and I have been at Amplify in my capacity of being chair of the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, which is part of a regulating education provider. And as a regulator, we are the handbrake of innovation. And what you don't know is actually, I think that we shouldn't have a future. We've got to actually deregulate this industry and look at education very differently than we look at it now.
Thanks, Sue. And Megan?
Hi, everyone. I am Megan Delacamina. I'm a leadership and gender strategist and an author. And we were asked to say something interesting. I'm thinking, I was panicking, like, what's interesting? But we were we're having a... That doesn't sound great, does it? No. So there's so much that's interesting. We're having a discussion about the future of work and skills, and I was reflecting on how many careers I've had. And I think I'm in, like, number 8. So I think that's an interesting point for our conversation today.
Awesome. My name is Don Price from Atlassian. I'm a recovering accountant. I trained as an accountant back in, and I don't look or sound like it, but it's been a long road. I've been sober for 14 years now. For me, yeah, the conversation here is partially about the future, and if we're brutally honest, more about the now. Like, I think we're in a little bit denial about these things that are happening in the future that are actually already happening. And so hopefully the discussion we can have today is around the action we can take, and less about dreaming about 2020, which is less than 1,000 days away, and more about what you can do tomorrow or next week with all the people that you influence.
My name is Scott Thompson. I work for Google. I've had many career changes, not as many as 8 though. That's very impressive.
Impressive, right?
I started as an R&D engineer developer, and I moved into IT operations and then marketing, natural shift, and then sales. And I don't know if I'm evolving or devolving, but given the current audience, I'll go with evolution. So sales makes the most money. Marketing has nicer canapes and cocktails. And if you want to change the world, learn technology.
Thanks, Scott. So maybe just as a first question, I wanted to start with the fact that it's fairly widely accepted, I think, by most people in the room now that there are skills that will become less and less valuable as we move forward. And in fact, we've already seen that happen to a certain degree. There are skills that will become more important in the future. And there are some that will become obsolete altogether. There are some that will emerge that don't even exist at the moment. Maybe just to get a gauge from each of the panellists about the degree of change we're talking here and the pace of change. And maybe we'll start with you, Scott. How big is this change that we're talking about?
So I think there is a substantial change coming. There's been a lot written about it. In various reports, the World Economic Forum 2016 had a long list of things that would disrupt the world as we know it, and a lot of it is to do with AI, machine learning, automation, robotics, nanotechnology, bioengineering, all technological innovations that will disrupt many different industries. So I think the pace of change is accelerating. And when I look at the pace of change, just coming out of the USA in its academic research and what it's managed to build in terms of innovation, and then I read the numbers of PhD researchers in China and India, I can only think this is not going to get slower anytime soon.
Thanks, Scott. What about you, Dom? What's your...
I like to talk about exponential. So I'm in a business where we're growing our number of customers every single day. The expectation of our customers increases every day, and their access to information increases. So they invariably know more about my business than I know. Where I'm getting competitors coming from all over the place, often from places I least expect, where the switching costs and the barriers to entry in my industry are getting lower, and the war for talent is increasing, and the talent pool isn't getting any smarter. In fact, there's more people trying to steal the same talent. And when you add those things together, you end up with the word exponential, which I think most people think they get, but don't get. And the example I give is this room's probably about 30 steps wide, 30 linear steps. Does anyone know how far you'd get if you did 30 exponential steps? 26 times around the planet. And so we talk about exponential like linear plus 1, right? Which is why we get lulled into this false sense of, I made a change today and it was better than yesterday, so can I have a certificate, please? I don't know where that comes from, but it kind of manifests, and yet we're celebrating mediocrity. I think what we have to accept is that pace and rate of change is there, and we have a choice to make. Do we own it and be part of it, or do we be a passenger and let it happen to us? And if we do, I don't think we'll like it.
And Megan, what's your view about the size of the change?
Look, I think we're in it, right? And it's only going to get faster and more widespread. And we talk a lot about the technological change and what that looks like, and robots and all of this stuff. What we don't talk so much about is the people change, the skills change, the leadership changes, the education changes. That's not keeping pace with the change that we're seeing. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation we're going to have today.
And maybe that's a nice segue, Sue, into the next question, which is a little bit about the nature of the change. So in your view, what are some of those skills that have become and will become even more important, and what are those skills that will become less important going forward?
Well, some of you may have heard me talking earlier, and certainly saying move away from subject matter and in terms of a reliance on subject matter and the technical skills that would be your passport to opportunities, because you can learn those. In fact, we're all going to have to learn them, relearn them, and it's more about how creative, how curious, how your ability to work with others, your values, and you've got to be able to think, but also what is your way you think and interact and can cross boundaries of this, bring this with this and bring something together. And I use that, the way you think, not from a middle class point of view. Everyone's got a contribution there, so how do we develop that?
Right. And Dom, what about yourself? What's your view about some of those skills that have become more important? You're using a couple of case studies about US in action.
So a couple of things. Let's talk about the skills that I don't think are required anymore. I apologise to anyone that was in this morning's session or anyone that's easily offended. So I will use the C word and the F word, so brace yourselves. Control and fear. So control is this thing, this almost like baggage we're carrying from the Industrial Revolution. It's really comfortable, by the way. You'll like it every day when you wear the control blanket. And it's you guaranteeing and predicting and promising and eliminating all variability and managing for certainty. And it's this legacy from the Industrial Revolution around this fixation on efficiency. This running of a factory where I have an illiterate workforce that can't be trusted and needs to be tightly managed. And the thing is, we're not in that world anymore. We are in a world where curiosity and creativity is a far higher currency than efficiency and consistency, and yet we're managing in old ways. You just have to look at the fact that 50% of the Fortune 500 from the year 2000 are no longer there. They were highly successful, very profitable, very efficient businesses, and their business models didn't evolve to stay relevant. They stopped being effective, and they got fixated on their internal workings, the legacy of being a 100 or 150-year-old company. The thing is, the market and your customers don't care how long you've been around. They care about the quality of your products and how they compete with your next best offering. And so skills around change, adaptability, understanding agility and nimbleness, and being aware of what's happening outside your four walls, those are things that I think are as powerful, if not more powerful, than your subject matter expertise at your traditional role. I think you need both, but one without the other is a complete failure.
Thanks, Dom. And Megan, you were also mentioning some research that looked at what has been seen as traditional female traits are actually emerging as some really important qualities for the future.
So there's research, some of the research that I work with, that's looked at 64,000 people from millennials to veterans in 13 countries representing 65% of GDP, which says that what people want from their leaders of the future are what have been by research called feminine traits. So a lot of the things that Sue was just referring to, creativity, collaboration, empathy, vulnerability, ability to plan for the future, are things that are much more important than if you looked inside most of our big organisations, corporate America, where I come from, things like command and control, yeah? That's where we're moving, that's what people want, but we're not there. You know, we might be there in pockets, and I absolutely see that in some of my work, but we're so far away from being able to lead and manage and work and have those skills. And this is what people want to see, and this is what's going to help balance the technological revolution.
And you've all talked quite a bit about the soft skills that we're likely to see emerge even with more of a focus going forward. Scott, you were also talking about the technical disciplines, and I think we've all hearing from you loud and clear that the technical qualifications are potentially going to become slightly less important, but we were also discussing the need to actually bring digital into some of the more technical qualifications that exist.
Yeah, so in my humble opinion, I believe that coding is a basic literacy skill. Being able to talk to a machine, if we're going to see more and more machines assisting in our jobs, becomes an essential piece of literacy. So it's vital that we start training everybody in it. So I'm delighted that my 5-year-old, in prep is learning coding. I'm delighted that my year 9 niece is learning Java programming and robotics. None of those courses I learnt till I got to uni. So there is this acceleration in where we're starting to teach it. And I have hope that we can fix some of the diversity statistics in technology, because as all jobs become more and more technical, it becomes essential that we raise the level of equality in terms of diversity in that technology state, because it would be akin to saying if we don't have equality and it is a basic literacy skill, we're going to have a large degree of people in those diversity segments who can't work. And that's going to not just be a bad thing socially, it's going to damage GDP.
And I'd love to hear from some of you about the kind of oddest sounding job that you've introduced in your organisations or come across in organisations that you work with that capitalises on some of these softer skills that we've talked about. And Scott, I don't know if this is correct. I read it on Google. I know you shouldn't believe everything on Google, but there was a little story about a team of people at Google that were employed specifically to sort through different shades of blue, and that what they were so their outcome was actually to come up with a perfectly shaded blue ad that maximised the consumer response to.
I haven't heard that story, so it might be fake news. I don't know. But what I can say is we did test whether blue chairs or green chairs led to greater productivity. I'm not going to tell you the answer. That's secret. You can go read about it on Rework with Google. It talks about people analytics and measuring things about changing fabric of chairs. But yeah, all of these things. There are people whose job it is to change the fabric of chairs and measure the collaboration of people. And did collaboration go up or did collaboration go down? But the main thing I guess I would like to say. I've been at Google for 18 months and I've been reorganised 4 times. And my co-worker's been there 5 years and has been reorganised 15 times. And reorganisation is not an uncommon event in Google. It sort of breaks up stagnation, and it also allows us to reorganise around what the next challenge is. So invariably when we set a new goal to transform or change our business, nobody's sitting in the right seat. So we have to change, and we have to learn new things. So when we hire people, the 4th most important thing we hire for is role-related knowledge. We're looking for general cognitive ability, leadership, which is a combination of collaboration, problem-solving, female traits, influence and personality, presence. Can you sort of stand up and command an audience and not stammer like I just did? And then the 3rd one is cultural fit, which comes into courage, innovation, risk-taking, wanting to change and transform, not being happy with the world the way it is, and also just are you a nice person or not? Are you going to be a fun person to work with? How well do you match our values fits into that as well. But role-related knowledge is 4th. If you have the top 3, we can teach you. Right? And that's the general goal. Nobody's going to stay doing the same thing for much longer than about 6 months.
And that might be a great segue into... Sorry, just jump in, sir.
A couple of things that Scott said is those fundamental literacies, numeracy, literacy, numbers, math, and ICT, so to call it coding, the literacies, understanding how those things work, and right through to civics and people are really critical. So, and I love the way you articulate it, Scott, because you're going to be interfacing with a machine somewhere in your area. And it was really interesting yesterday when Rachel Bockman was talking about the trust leap, and talking about for me, it was she put a new part in the jigsaw in the way she articulated it in terms of the trust, the move to openness, transparency, what we as consumers will demand. And so coming to your question of, what's the new role is overnight I'm thinking about this trust engineer. And if I married that with Scott's comment, it's actually someone that is working through thinking about the ethics, the how does that work. Mm-hmm. But they've got to have a digital literacy, because the reason it's a critical part of this equation right now is because of the digitisation going on.
Yeah, essentially we want everyone to fundamentally understand how it all works. Yeah. It makes everything faster. And even if it's just people, fundamentally understanding how the technology works just makes it faster. If you have to stop and explain it to somebody or defer to an outside consultancy or bring in an expert, you're going to be slower.
And Scott, you started talking a little bit about how we try and select for these skills, how we develop these skills within our organisations, and I'm sure that's something a lot of people would be interested in the room, how they start developing and selecting for those skills within their teams. That was a really interesting example. Dom, I know you've got an interesting one at Atlassian about your values.
Yeah, so we do a values interview as part of our interview process. The values interviewer is separate from the team that you may join, and the values interviewer has veto rights. They're looking for potential, not the finished product. But essentially, what we're saying is we don't test for culture because I don't want a singular culture. That's bad. I don't want homogenous teams that all think the same. Great minds don't think alike. You know, I encourage cognitive diversity, and I want to create a culture which is inclusive. So to do that, we need to embrace different cultures. We also don't want cults. There's plenty of organisations I get to visit that drop the URE of culture and just have everyone looking the same in the same grey suit. So the challenge there is, how do you understand someone's values, and how do you make sure their values are congruent with yours as an organisation? Because that takes a lot of the pressure off how you behave differently at home to in work. And for me, the two end up kind of blurring into each other. The interesting thing there is, what we realised is you can hire a really smart technical person, use a complete douche, and they will have way worse an impact, and they will kill the mojo of way more people than you can ever realise. And the minute as a leader you accept that, you are 10 times worse than that person. Because the minute you make it all right, someone else will mimic you and copy you, and like a cancer, it will spread. Yeah. So we have a pretty clear policy that we do not allow that kind of behaviour in our organisation. We want different cultures. We want people to bring their local customs and ways of working, and we want to evolve that culture, but we will not sacrifice our values. And because of that, our values are quite clear and easy to understand. So there isn't pride or respect or integrity or any other hygiene factors in there. It's open company, no bullshit. It's don't F the customer. It's build with heart and balance. It's be the change you seek. And because they are so visceral, we live and breathe them every day. They do not exist on posters. We reward and recognise them. And if someone goes against the values at whatever level, however senior or junior, whatever their role, we will have that conversation early. And we'll have an honest conversation about it. And it drives a very different level of momentum than those places where they are political or hierarchical, and it's about doing the right thing to placate because you just want to keep your job.
And Tom, you touched on diversity a couple of times there, actually, which I think is another topic that everyone's very interested in. I think we've all done a lot of work over the last couple of years within our organisations to focus on diversity and inclusiveness. Interested in your views, and maybe we can start with you, Sue, about whether these future skills that we've been talking about favour or disadvantage any particular minority group, and whether we have to be mindful of that going forward.
I'm not the academic in this area, but so there'll be others that know a lot more about it. But I think there's two things that are on my mind. One is there is diversity bias already, and as we build our AI response to a lot of things, are we locking in diversity bias going forward? And we've got to think about how do we break that. The other bit is, if you look at some of the reports on where the changes are likely to happening now, a lot of those roles are held by women. Particularly in the corporate, the admin type area, and I'm not talking EA area, I'm talking about the services support. So I think we have to be very vigilant as we're thinking about challenging ourselves individually, but also organisations and when we move forward, are we making sure we're keeping that? I like Dom's point, cognitive diversity. That's what I'm going for. To get that, you need diversity. And I think we're at risk sometimes with the jobs that will become vulnerable, decreasing diversity. And it scares the hell out of me embedding a diversity bias into AI.
Maybe we give a real example. So who here owns a car? Like 3 people that don't. Good on you. You're very environmentally friendly. So those cars most likely have an airbag. So when the airbag was invented, it was invented by a group of men. And they did the maths on the average weight of a person to set the tolerance for the airbag. And men weigh more than women. So there was a whole lot of deaths to women and children when the first airbags came out. because they were too powerful. Because the average age of a bloke is more than the average age of a lady. And so that was great intent, and people talk about great intent all the time. Great intent is not enough. Follow through is what counts.
Yes.
So the lack of diversity in that team, yes, they created a great invention that we live and breathe by every day now and we take for granted, but the mistakes they made when they first released that was because they thought they had diversity in their team and they built based on what they could see in front of them.
So I would like to add to that in that we built some machine learning into our camera technology, so it would obviously take better pictures.
That was my other example. I
Was
didn't
it?
do that because you're on stage.
Well, let me do it. Let me do it to Google for you. And unfortunately, the first engineers who built it were all white, and so it adjusted for white skin tone. And so a lot of people who had darker skin tones basically faded into the background, or didn't come up nice. So by having greater diversity on our engineering teams, some engineers with different skin colour optimise the algorithm for better skin colour. So I think you have a very fine point, and a lot of it is when you're looking at using AI or machine learning, it is critical that you have the right diversity in the teams that develop it, because otherwise you do program in the bias. And we make mistakes on this, and we trust in our diversity hiring practices to try and help fix this before it becomes a problem.
And the data bias
Yeah.
will feed in
Yeah, the data bias,
based
yeah.
on the biases of today
Yeah.
and then reinforce them.
Yeah. Thank you for not mentioning
It's all
that.
right, no. Next time I will.
And
You're
so
my permission.
we've heard from all of you, I think, loud and clear that we're talking about a change that's already taking place, but probably not fast enough, and a much greater change that's required, much greater emphasis on some of these soft skills and changing the technical qualifications to focus more on digital. So how is this talent revolution going to take place? In your views, who's taking accountability for this change so far? Is it the corporations? Is it the individuals? Is it the governments? Is it the educational institutions? Megan might want to start with that.
So look, it's got to happen everywhere. And if we just take the organisational component right now, and we were talking in the session that we were having a chat beforehand, these guys are the anomaly, not the rule. And I think in a discussion about the future of work, we need to understand that. So if we look at organisations, we're still managing in a large case for the status quo, not for the future, without question. And then all the way through to education, which is such an important conversation. If we talk about the skills and we're teaching our kids coding, that's awesome. How are we teaching them creativity? And how are we teaching them collaboration? And how are we teaching them empathy and intuition, which are the traits that we're going to need. And I just want to say they're not female traits, they're feminine traits. So they show up in men and women, which is really important, right? So it's not men are going to become irrelevant. It's that we all need, we could have that conversation. Can we have that conversation?
That's a different topic.
But that we all, all genders need to develop these traits that are more feminine traits from our kids all the way through. And that's how we're going to get this balance. I mean, I was looking at research from Harvard University on the future of skills, and it's an equal balance between mathematical skills and these softer, critical skills that we need to build. So we've got to do both, and it's got to be across the board.
And Sue, what about you?
I'm really am concerned that when we particularly look at organisations, we are absolutely just doing incremental change. And I sit in mostly at the governance level around boards, and we rock up the GM people or whatever we're calling them now, and it's sort of like, tell us about it, and they come in and they maybe talk a little bit about it, but actually we uphold a hierarchy of business process, business model, and we are tinkering with it. And so where does the responsibility start? It starts with all of us, but in our roles, we need to say, what are we doing here and where are we the handbrake of this? And we cannot wait for the Big Bang Theory of government. In fact, I think our role is to put pressure and create tipping points where the regulation that is preventing us doing different things or approaching education in a different way actually just falls apart. Because we, be it the individuals, the parents, the corporations, are wanting to do it differently.
I think building on that responsibility, so I think everyone in the room has a responsibility to education, and everyone has an obligation not just around diversity in education, diversity in STEM, but equally around creating the right kind of training, so with the right skills. So if you look at, I firmly agree in soft skills being extremely important for rapid change, but if we focus on technical skills, with marketing it has become dreadfully technical. And yet everyone who graduates from all but one Australian university at the moment studies a business finance degree in marketing with no technical background. And that has not been fixed, even though marketing has been incredibly technical for over a decade. And so 3 years ago when I was working for Adobe, I worked with the University of Swinburne University in Melbourne to create a technical digital marketing degree. And it was a minor or a major with a business degree. So people would graduate with technical skills. And those graduates are coming available at the end of this year. Go talk to Swinburne. There's 150 of them. But next year there might be 250. But this is how it gets fixed. It doesn't get fixed because we all sit there and cross our arms and say, wait for the universities to fix it. When you go to the university to create a course, they say, how do you prove the business demand? Guess what? If a business goes there and says, I need these skills, they'll create a course for you. They may ask you, like, explain your business processes, what do you want to change? But by taking ownership of it, you create the skills for the future.
But I'd go a step further and say we've got to bust out of this model of that's great, that's a 4-year degree, you go and do it, 150 people, and where can we participate in this? And maybe we can do it for 4 weeks, maybe we can do it for 4 days, maybe it can be for 6 months. Can you self-direct that, or is it all at these times you plug in to be part of it? And I was sharing with some of the others, we've got a little pilot going on at the moment in our area where we've got major investor wanting to be in New Zealand in the autonomous vehicle space, but they want to be sure they can actually get enough people with the right skills to support the R&D. You know, this is big investment in R&D. And they're not worried about age or any, they just want the right skills. So they came and said, we want to use this Udacity course that goes into wherever through the platform, and New Zealand, you know, we're going, oh my God, you know, I mean, we're just assured New Zealand delivered things, and we're so clear what you have to be a New Zealand provider, and don't worry, we will protect all of you from having any bad providers. So here is this need. The Ministry of Transport, the Transport Agency all want this to happen. So we've then gone and the investor said, please use this Udacity course. So we've said, okay, what's the equivalent? And now we're looking at badging that. And why are we badging it? Badging it means you sort of get a badge at the end that says, I did this. It's equivalent to what you know as a master's. And by the way, I didn't take 3 years. And I didn't have to pre-qualify for it or anything. I was able to just participate in it. But by doing that, I've now got a currency of what I've done. So as the learner, I get it badged versus the traditional way we looked at it. So I'd go further that, and it's not saying what you're doing is we shouldn't do that, but there's so many other ways we can get there. And some of it is about the speed. Like, we can't wait 4 years, and some of the things that you might think are great now, in 4 years that won't be the right thing. So why not do it in 6 months? Why not do it when it suits you to do it?
And so it's been interesting to hear a couple of suggestions or experiences from each of you in response to that question in terms of actions we can take now, either within ourselves or within our organisations, or agitate for educational institutions to take to develop some of those future skills. But for the most part, you know, we're talking about educated, highly skilled people. I think the other interesting part of the conversation is there a social responsibility, and how do we kind of step in there, or who should step in to actually start to upskill some of the less skilled part of the population who is going to miss out in this equation. We talked about transport workers, for example, Ruben mentioned in his introduction.
Because I do sit in, for some of the things I do, in that space that interfaces with the government, I think that absolutely we have got some transition times now, but we've also got some specific transition issues that, if you look at humanity, we collectively must address. And so there are, how do we take, if we think about the transport area and we know it's going through major change, how do we help people have access? Now, some of it is we help by making it known what they can access, and we facilitate that, or we bring it into, like we're doing a lot of work with Māori and Pacific Island, and the way that you work with them is you work through their families. So you don't actually stick it on a website or do conventional ways of reach. You actually go into the churches for the number of the Pacific Island people to reach them, and the aunties and uncles and families who will say, this is a really important thing, we will go. And so there can be an intervention and a way it's delivered that it is still the individual choice, but you've got to think about how do you reach the right target audiences to help with some of those sort of big shifts that maybe we need to see.
I think just, if we bring it back a step, the challenge is that in this room, most of you self-selected to be here, and by virtue of being here and our backgrounds and experience and our roles, we're probably safe, right? So we're talking about this, we're talking about the people that aren't in the room, okay? So that's the first thing. Second thing, we're shit at it, and we need to be honest about that. Because we're shit at it because we're selfish. We focus on us and our family and our tribes and our teams, and then maybe our organisations. And in doing that, we inherently have a short-term attitude to it, which is, does it give me a return this year, yes or no? If not, I might think about it. If it doesn't, probably not going to happen. And what none of us are doing, and it's the paralysis that I'm seeing, is if the greater impact is societal, how do we understand that change? And it frustrates me because I believe we have more information, we definitely have more data, hopefully we have more information and insights than any other generation before us. But instead of taking action on that information, we sit around and talk about it. And it's safe for us to talk about it because it's not going to impact us. And the reason that's strange is you look at places like Rio Tinto, where their entire mine runs on self-driving trucks. And we talk about self-driving vehicles like it's a new thing. They've had them for 3 years. That isn't the future. That's been happening for 3 years. And yet we're not looking at that as a precedent and understanding the impact that had on roles, how they retrained, how that survived the community and the impact. We're ignoring that and going, oh, I wonder what will happen if we ever have self-driving cars. We already have, and let's look at what's happening, right? It's kind of there, but because we're comfortable, there is no burning platform for us to make the change. And I think that's the realization we need to have is, even though we might not be impacted directly, if we genuinely care about the total impact, now, or maybe in the past, but now is simply the time to take action and not just discuss it endlessly.
Can I just add to that? I mean, this is a value shift we're talking about as well, right? So the World Economic Forum compiles a report every year on the top 10 trends, like the top 10 things that we need globally to be concerned about. And leadership's been in that for the last 3 years. And one of the core things around that has been lack of values in leadership. And this is about thinking about the whole, not just us in the room, not just how my organisation or my bottom line or my community, if I'm a politician, is being impacted, but the sum of the whole, right? And I'm really hopeful that what we're seeing with the millennials coming through and their search for meaning in what they're looking for, and not just me and my money, because money's so far down the list. That is going to help drive this, not only a leadership shift, but a global value shift as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. At this point, we might maybe just open up to the floor. I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I think we've got a question. Have we got a microphone for this gentleman? Thank you.
I think you started to touch on, I suppose, there's heard a lot about disruption and all these jobs that are going to be affected, and we can automate. I guess the question is, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And so I'd like to know who's asking the questions around that in terms of the impact, I suppose, on workforces and age diversity in the workforce as well as gender diversity.
I'd come back to say, are you asking the question? Like, who's going to do it? We're going to do it.
Well, I am.
But we have to do it in our environments, in our families, in our workplaces, in our places of influence to actually have these. Dom's my best friend, my new best friend I've met today, is stop the talk and do some stuff. and stop coming to all of these and go in and don't go back to work tomorrow and start just doing a little bit, maybe a tiny bit different, but otherwise it was really cool, these people came along and blah, 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 is do stuff and ask those questions. And the environment we're in, I think, is quite permissive. You can try stuff. And you can try stuff in your communities, you can try stuff at home, you can try stuff in your work team, you can try stuff as A&P, you don't have to get it all right. So I think getting that sort of mind shift of, okay, let's do something that is significantly different. And if we got it wrong, it doesn't matter, but make sure we called it if we got it wrong.
So my answer is that a robot will not take your job. A CEO will. Someone in this room will make a decision about your job without you. And so this notion that we can blame robotics and automation is great because they never answer back. But it's people making those decisions, right? And so as humans, we need to learn how to be human with each other and understand that. My concern is a slightly different angle, which is I don't think whole jobs or roles will get taken. I think parts of jobs will. So let's imagine, for shits and giggles, I do a 40-hour week, right? I don't. But let's pretend I do a 40-hour week. 10 of those hours right now are doing quite mundane tasks. Refreshing presentations, admin tasks that are not that taxing on the brain. I love those tasks because they give me a chance to kind of chill, the brain to recharge, and it means the other 30 hours I can be switched on. So when those 10 hours get automated and a device does that for me, what happens to those 10 hours? Does my employer give me those back as social leisure time and pay me the same salary?
Balanced life.
I really hope they do, but I'm not holding my breath for that. And so the thing I'm worried about is we've only got one of these, right? And mine gets pretty frazzled on a busy week as it is. So what are we doing to understand the human element of work and the future workforce and mindfulness and our preparedness to talk about mental health? Because I think the more we give harder, meaningful, taxing work to people and take away the mundane, we are going to put pressure on something that we've not put pressure on before.
And
Can I just add something? Because I love your question. Because the quality of change and disruption is fully dependent on the questions that we ask, right? We know that, yeah? So, I think it's a really important question. What are the questions that we're asking and how are we developing the people who are asking the questions based on all the things that we've been talking about so that we get to the right answer, yeah? I think it's an incredibly important question.
Just something to think about here. We can, as a society, have a viewpoint, and I hope we do. But we are one society on the planet, and we can see how some countries might want to put themselves first from time to time. Dublin with tax, America with production. So Adidas automated some of their shoe manufacturing factories, put one in the US and one in Germany. And it's not so much about automating the jobs, it's about moving the production facility closer to the point of distribution and sale, and reducing and taking out the entire transport cost. So it's not about we want to replace the humans in Southeast Asia who are stitching the shoes in sweatshops with robots that have a clean supply chain. It's that I don't have to ship it across the ocean. It can just be built right by where it's going to be sold. Does that have a social impact? Yes. Do we have a responsibility for that social impact? Yes. But we're also talking about sovereign nation states where we kind of compartmentalise that morality and ethics within a country and say, well, so long as it's us first, it's all okay. Sorry, did I beat up Trump enough? I don't know.
And in fact,
Not enough.
Yeah, I did at the end though.
There's a real conflict that we live every day of our lives on that point.
Yeah.
So we live, I'm a Kiwi, all these things about Kiwi, and we have all these jokes about Australia, and you have all the jokes about us, and we live Kiwi. And then we have these rules at the sovereignty border, but every day I participate globally, and I don't want that to be taken away. And so I'm talking personalised to me, but a whole lot of us. And so there's a real tension which we are seeing played out right now. And some of that is haves and have-nots. Some of it's about technology, some of it's about other things that have been there. But it's a very it's a really demanding, taxing issue for us to get our heads around and find solutions going forward.
Any other questions
Great question.
from the audience? I think we've got
one
one
over
over.
here.
Microphone's coming.
Hi, Michael Weeding from AMP. I mean, my questions is on diversity. We spoke a lot about diversity, but one of the things that worry me the most, and I'm going to ask you a question about the role that you think companies, particularly companies like Google, play. I think the generation that's coming through, the kids are at school. My brother's an educator. He showed me once the amount of kids that commit suicide in year 11 and 12. And, you know, I spoke to a whole lot of kids about that once and a few times. And, you know, the session I set up for them was saying, watch me do the opposite, because we aren't all that perfect, right? They've got this perception. And if I listen to the skills that you brought, particularly even the skills that, you know, I'd need to work at Google, I'd go, man, it's so, like leadership, you started rattling off all the skills. Well, the kids that are coming up through the schools today are looking up at us and going, well, I'm not perfect at everything. Someone who's creative might have a whole lot of anxiety, right? But that's the skill that they bring, and that's the limitation that they have. But we as organisations are in search for such perfection that we forget about that generation. My concern is, are we as companies spending enough time to not keep talking things up too much, but talking down to say, we will love that you're imperfect in many particular ways. You might not ever need to go to university to excel in a career in our company, but I don't hear that. I don't hear that anywhere, and I worry the fact that we've got a whole lot of kids that are coming up that feel so under pressure that they will take their life in the last 2 years because they may be feeling that there's no hope for them in the future. And do we as organisations have that responsibility when we need to talk about diversity and not just talking about how perfect everyone needs to have about creativity, leadership, but being imperfect is a fantastic skill to have as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, maybe jump in.
How long have we got? I think this is a really important point that you're raising, and I don't think it's just year 11 and 12. You know, my son is in year 11. In year 7, a boy at his school committed suicide in the bathrooms at school at 8 a.m. Like, this is everywhere, right? The mental health of our kids and the resiliency of our kids. The whole discussion, one of the reasons I love the discussion around the feminine traits is because we're talking about vulnerability, we're talking about authenticity. These things that from an organisational perspective, which I spent 18 years of my life in and still consult to, are not, you know, there's very little permission to be in a meeting and say, I don't know the answer to that. That's vulnerability, yeah? Or to bring your whole self to work, which we were talking about before. I have a home self and a work self. And how do I bring that together? And like this is the cultural narrative, right? This is the social narrative that we create because the majority of the world's population, Western world, work in organisations. So like it has to start with us and then it permeates everywhere because we're the ones who are showing up, driving these conversations in society, yeah? But I think that this conversation that goes down to our kids, how we educate, how we build resiliency, how we build mindfulness, you know, positive psychology in schools is one of the most important conversations we need to be having about the future.
And add to that, inclusion. So I think where the diversity narrative falls over is we treat it in isolation. I want to create a diverse workforce, so I'll go and hire one of everything. And then I treat them all the same. Well, I've just pissed off 95% of them. And so inclusion is about saying it is okay to bring your best self. In fact, I want you to bring your best self to work. And your best self is your identity, your narrative, your story. And as long as you're authentic, I'll back you. And that is very different because that's inclusion, which is very different from diversity. And I think you have to do the two side by side, and they're really, really effing hard. And anyone who thinks they've got the answers to them is just kidding you, because it's trial and error and practice and making mistakes and asking for apology. It's not
understanding,
not
right?
Yeah.
It's like
it's hard.
we talk a lot about diversity, and I was presenting on this at Amplify in Melbourne. We don't talk about inclusion. And people don't understand. You know, you go and ask any manager in any organisation, they'll get diversity. Talk to me about inclusion. What do you do every day to create an inclusive workforce?
Sorry, Megan, we might have to wrap up. I think we could have another panel.
I said, how long have we got?
Yeah. Just a very quick comment.
We talk about people alchemy, which is essentially you put two people together and they're far greater than they are apart. And you only get true collaboration through differences. We don't want everyone to be cookie cutter. I'm sorry if I gave that impression. But we want that people alchemy. And if you needed to progress academically to change the world, then Steve Jobs wouldn't have made such a dent, would he? Right? So I think we can't just look at academic credentials and perfection and say they're the people who are going to change the world.
Thanks, Scott, for that closing comment. Well, thank you to all the panellists for that great conversation. I certainly found it very interesting. I think there were some great takeaways there about the degree of change that we should expect and the fact that we're already in the midst of change, and so that we need to act now. I think we had some great conversation about what the types of skills we need to focus more on developing in our teams, developing in ourselves, developing in our children, and also what the responsibility we all have as individuals, but also as leaders in organisations, and how we can also start to agitate for change, for example, with some of the big institutions like the educational institutions. And just on that note, I thought I'd just finish with a quote from Alan Finkel, who is the Chief Scientist for Australia, because it does bring to life a number of the themes that we touched on. And he said, "It's time to recognise that it's not a failure to progress to a job that has no obvious link to one's degree. The capacity to pivot is probably the most reliable predictor of success in the future world." And I think if we can pass that little gem on to our children, then we're all helping to develop skills for the future. So thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you, panelists.